What's up, everyone? Today we are painting the Gorgomination. The Gorgomination. The Gorgomination. He's a mixture of a Gorgon, the Demigorgon, the thing from D&D, and an abomination. So, let's get down to the table, and I'll show you how I did them. Alright, so we started with a black primer as the base, and then a white primer as the zenithal highlights from the top down, just to help us see where the base skin tone is versus the fleshy skin tone. And I'm using refractive green, which is a dark green brown, like a really forest green color. And this is going to be for all of the reptile skin that the Gorgomination, I'm just going to call him the Gorgon from now on, the skin tone that the Gorgon has. He also has a very different skin tone that makes up his chest and the bottom of each tentacle and tail and like the back of his legs. So you want to make sure that you have a pretty clean line between the two of them. We will blur that line in a minute, but during the base coating phase, if you get too much of this dark color on that, it's going to be really difficult to cover up. You're already having to fight against the black primer that's on there. You don't want to have to keep fighting every color that you put on. So you can see after 2 coats, it has a really nice even green color, and that'll be the shadowy colors for our Gorgon. Now I'm taking some flat flesh and I'm mixing a little orange into it. Not very much, but the orange tint, I think, brings this flesh into the, it keeps it in that red, very hot feel, and I think that that's what we need. We don't want a bluish or purple feel to it. I think we want that really hot flesh to mix with the cold green, considering it's like a greenish brown, very neutral color. Well, neutral in the brown, and then the green is cold. So you got like the cold neutral scale. You've got the neutral tan skin tone mixed with orange, so you have a hot color mixed in there. Is what I mean. So color theory wise, I think that these two colors look really, really good together. They also match the character art pretty well. The thing is that the model itself does not match the character art very well, so you do have to take some artistic liberties just to figure stuff out. So here you go. I've got multiple coats on there. It does take about 3 coats to cover up the black if you do zenithal priming. So now I'm taking some glaze medium and I'm mixing that into both of the colors that I've used, so the refractive green and the skin tone. And this is going to allow the paint to stay wetter for longer, because we're going to wet blend the edges. So we want a really crisp line between the two colors to start, but then we're going to blur that line a little bit. So you want to paint a little bit of the skin tone on both sides, and then take a clean wet brush. So you can either clean your brush or use a second wet brush, which is called 2-brush blending, and just drag from the darker line, or the darker side, into the lighter side. You're going to end up with a very like seafoam green color. That's okay, because we're actually going to use a wash to line this back up. But what this does is it makes it so that on both sides of the dividing line, there is a little bit of each other's color in there. And I think that makes that line, even though that the line is very crisp, it makes it look natural. It looks like a fade from one to the other. You can't do a pure wet blend here. It doesn't work. The colors are too different. You would need middle stages. So I'm using Reikland Flesh Shade, which is the flesh colored wash. And I'm putting that all over this skin tone. I'm trying to keep it off of the green, but I'm also allowing a little extra to pool in right between the two colors. Like I said, I'm trying to line the model at those spots. So even though I'm allowing it to go everywhere on the model, I am going to go back for a second and third pass to make sure that there is a nice dividing line. And so you can see that, especially on the tail there, that I've used it to create shadows and line a ton of parts on the model, including between like the legs and underneath the muscles. P3's worm green. This is a very electric green, and I started mixing this into refractive green. Now I'm going to dry brush all of the green skin. It's kind of difficult to decide what to do with a model that has the skin of this Gorgon in the pictures. There's a lot of texture there and a lot of spikes and things that just aren't represented on this model, so you have to kind of just figure it out. But the thing with dry brushing is that if you do it properly, you can actually make it look like wet blending. That's not what I'm trying to do here, but I just mean you can do it so smoothly that the blend is hard to even notice. And that's what I was trying to do. Is I only added a tip of my brush full of the worm green into the refractive green and then dry brush. Then I add another tipful and dry brush, then another tipful and dry brush. And even though it did take a little while, it's so easy and so fast that overall the entire process only took maybe like 5 or 6 minutes because it dries incredibly quick. But usually when you dry brush, you do one pass and you're done. You move on. But with this, I really took the time to slowly build up some color so that the transition is much better. So now after I've done maybe like 6 or 7 passes at that time, I think, of varying degrees, I added some turquoise and yellow into pure worm green to get this very, very bright like sea green color. And I'm using a very crappy brush, taking most of the paint off as if I was gonna dry brush it, and then just dabbing it all over the miniature, in trying to focus on parts that are facing up for the most part, ensuring that it's lighter areas because this is a lighter color. But you'll see I did not put much on the model. There is no spot where you're gonna see and be like, oh, that's where he put this stuff. It is just a way that I tried to add some texture to the skin, and I actually think that like in application it works really, really well. I might have actually pushed it a little harder if I did this again. Added a couple more passes of it. So I'm going to zoom in here and you'll be able to see on the shoulders and the muscles there some of that brighter hue. So you can see it just sort of like brings out different colors in it, and it kind of tricks your brain into like you're seeing these blues and you're seeing these yellows, but when you actually try to find them on the model, you can't. Here I'm adding fairy flesh and highlight flesh to my line, and in varying degrees I'm adding lighter and lighter colors. If you've ever watched a miniature painting video before, all we're doing is layering. We're just coming back and removing some of that wash that is directly on the muscle, leaving the wash down in the recesses, and starting to highlight up all of the muscles. I don't want your eyes to be drawn to the green skin so much. I really want it to be drawn to the tentacles and kind of the weirdness of this model. And because of that, I want to really push the highlights on his lighter parts. So because of that, I am going to bring the color up way farther than I did with the green skin. So the green skin only went a couple of layers brighter by the time it was done. Like noticeable layers. Even though I put many layers in between, there was only about 2 or 3 noticeable layers on top of the dark green. The skin tone, the orangish skin tone, is very different. This is going to come out and really pop, and I think that that's going to add like an air of weirdness to this model, which is kind of what you want, right? You want him to look weird, you want them to stand out, you want it to be creepy, but you don't want it to look bad. You don't want the weird to look like off-putting. So we're still using colors that make sense. It's just that we're pushing the shadow areas brighter than the light areas. Now within each of their own areas, we are still obeying the laws of light physics here, and I'm only putting the highlights where light would hit them. So eventually I stopped highlighting the calf. I only highlight like the top of the calf. I stopped highlighting the tail after like basically the second color. I used that to sort of clean up the shadow on the tail. And then I just pick out little tiny areas around each tentacle, and you know, like on the calf at the very top of it, as you see here, just to give you know, a little bit of depth to it. But you just want to respect where light would naturally fall in those portions. And then here's the final highlight. It's very bright, and I'm just picking out little tips of the muscle and little tips of a few of the tentacles, just to really push that contrast. So now this is something that I haven't really done before. I'm going to add some red to that refractive green. And now, if you add red to green, these are not complementary colors. These are opposite colors. I forget what that's called in color theory, but that's not the point. The point is that they are across the spectrum from each other. If you mix full red and green, you get brown. That is what happens every time. You do not get a reddish green or a greenish red. You get brown. So you have to add red very lightly. We're talking about a 1:5 ratio at best. So if you look at the character art, on the tips of the tentacles, you can't see the tail, but on the tips of the tentacles and on the plating on its feet, you see that the color is red. It is not blood, but it is that the tentacles fade to red. So what I've done is, in basically 1 part red, 5 parts refractive green, I come and paint the tips of all the areas that I think should be this reddish color. Then I come back with just a little bit more red. Now we're talking 1.5 to 5. 3 to 10 is what we're talking about here, and adding a little bit more on it so that you can actually, your eye draws that red out of it. But again, it is still not red. And if you would do anything more than this, you're going to start going into brown. This is the best red-green that you can get, but you have to do it slowly, and you have to like measure each little tiny bit that you put in. And if you put too much, just scrap it and make a new little pile of color. But I think that this adds so much to the model. It's worth it because it's only 2 layers and it's very, very quick, but I think it adds so much to making the model look unique. Now we're using black, and I'm using a very dark purple from Vallejo's game color line. And the purple is because on all the spikes that the Gorgon has, they aren't exactly black. They're the black in the darkest shadows, but they sort of fade to purple. And the best way to do that is to start with some purple in the black. Black paint, if you're not using ink, black paint is always ashy anyway. So by adding this purple in there, you actually get a very deep, rich color of black, which in some light you can see the purple in. I believe like a 50-50 mixture, and I'm painting all of the spikes. There's spikes on the tail, there's spikes on the tentacles, there are the toenails, and then eventually we even get to the horns, which I will show you, of course. But we're starting with basically a 50-50 mixture and just getting all of this. This is really where you have to take some artistic liberty. There aren't good spikes on this model, and it's because the model is so small. I mean, it's a big model in comparison to the other Zombicide models, but in comparison to a you know, a big 1 foot tall sculpture. Of course, it's very tiny. This thing is only maybe 3.5, 4 inches tall, so you don't really have much to work with here. The little tiny spikes would just break off and bend. The horns sort of fade into the green, and there's a lot of ways you could do this. You could wet blend. I didn't want to wet blend because I, at this point, felt like I was kind of done with the green skin, and I really didn't want to mess with that anymore. So I just sort of lined it very carefully and tried to make it feathered at the end by using a wet brush and just sort of feathering the end of it. Then I came back with some more purple. This is like 75% purple, 25% black, and tipped all of the spikes that I had painted black on the tentacles, on the top of the tentacles, not the bottom. We haven't done those yet, but the top of the tentacles and the top of the tail and the nails. And then finally for the horns, I used pure purple. Did it on just the very tips with a couple of little lines coming down to edge highlight them in the bright purple, and then I did the same for the nails. So those are pushed a little bit farther down the purple line. Now we're going to work on the back spikes. This is a part where I just had to figure it out. I've seen other people online just not do them at all, just left them green because they don't look like the spikes in the artwork. But I decided, you know what, I'll try it. So I went with that 50-50 of black and purple, and we're basically going to recreate them by dry brushing. You have to really truly dry brush. You want your brush as dry as possible. You do not want paint running into the cracks. You want underneath each of these spikes to remain green, so that as you rotate the model, you're going to see a bunch of different colors. And that's what I think makes it look the coolest. When I've shown this model to a couple friends already, the first thing they said was, "Oh, I really like how you did the back." And that's because depending on how you look at it, it changes its look. And what I'm doing is each subsequent dry brush, I'm doing a little bit lighter. You can see this model bounces all over the place. And the fact that he's barely moving, and it looks like he's moving a lot, but he's actually barely moving to what normally happens. The fact that he's barely moving, I'm not pushing very much. I did about 5 different coats of varying degrees of purple and ended with a almost pure purple that was very bright and focused just around the center of those spikes. Now I'm coming back, and all the little spikes underneath the tentacles I'm painting in pure black. We're not going to do any purple for these. They're just very, very small, and you sort of have to take a liberty with them. But as you can see there, I figured it out. I put pretty much 2 at every little slot. Now we're going to take black and fill in the mouth. Since we already have the black out, might as well. And now I'm taking some of the brightest skin tone, and I'm just tapping this very lightly on the tips of all of those spikes that I created. Now, you might not like this, you might absolutely love it. I think that it came out pretty cool, but it does give the air of that they're more of tentacle like suction cups and not spikes. But I think that it does actually make the model look really good. Those spikes were really ill-defined, but I really wanted to put them in there, and that just sort of makes it difficult. So now we have buff and ivory. I'm starting with Vallejo model color buff on the teeth, and that is on both of the model's heads. And I only put it on the top row because I'm going to eventually put blood on the bottom row, so I didn't even bother painting them in. And then what I'm doing is I zoomed in here. I'm just taking the ivory and running it along the teeth in some vertical stripes, just ensuring that there is buff showing through. Well, that is the miniature done, so you can now base them however you want, but I had an idea. The whole point of the Gorgon is it has to be summoned from other dimensions, so I wanted there to be some runes, so I drew this rune pattern on the ground, and I end up changing it, but I do keep the basic idea. So I take the Vallejo black asphalt. It's an earth texture that is in pure black, and it looks like either like volcano ash, or some like asphalt. I've used it as street topping for other minis. Now I'd recommend putting it on with a brush and then using the tool to make it nicer. The tool is, these modeling tools are not the best for actually moving the medium out of the pot. So I struggle with this for a minute and then eventually just grab a brush and do it that way. Much faster, much easier. You'll save yourself a ton of time. So now I've let it dry for just a little bit, and I come back with the tool and I press into it. So it's only dried about 15 minutes, just enough to get really tacky and not want to move all over the place, but it doesn't come off onto the tool when I try to mold it. So all I'm doing is relaying those lines, the circle around his foot, and then a couple extra little lines that are going sideways or perpendicular to the lines that I created to make like a cross. Now we're using pure white here, and I'm going to paint in all those lines just to have a different base than the black, because we're going to paint in like glowing runes here into the base, and we don't want it to just be on the black. It'll be very, very dark. Now we also don't want it to be on just the white, because that would be too bright. So what we're going to do is take the white and completely cover it in blue wash. So I did show that I have some glaze medium. I didn't put the glaze medium in yet. We will use that in a little bit. So right here I'm just using the pure wash, just trying to darken this down to a nice blue color. And here you can see I'm using a dark blue, which is Prussian blue, a light blue, which is azure, and white. So I'm taking first the Prussian blue and azure mixture, and I'm painting the entire circle here. Now if you know a better way to do runes, let me know. Let me know how you like to do them. I'm still experimenting with it, and I find that this pretty much gets the job done, but it also looks a little bit like water when it's done, so there's probably better ways to do it. Now I'm taking more azure, and this is the lighter blue, and I'm painting in, leaving some of the original Prussian blue mixture there in the middle, but anywhere where two lines meet, it's getting this lighter blue color. So anywhere that the lines meet, you would think that there's more power in that section because there's more lines there. And so those are a little bit brighter. And then I went back and I did another coating with just the white and blue, and then dotted with white. So there you can see I just kept making it brighter and brighter, cutting out more and more areas. Now this is where I use the glaze medium in the blue wash, and I'm coating a little bit on his feet, and that's going around the sides there, and then on the right hand foot that is lifted up in the air, and a little bit on his shin. Now I thinned it down with the glaze medium so that I could control how much blue is on there. I did not want the model to turn blue. I wanted it to have a blue like glow to it. I didn't push it all the way up to the tail. I'm not sure if that would have been a good idea, but I was afraid of ruining the model and having to start over or repaint. So I just moved on. Here I got some rocks. Just got them from the garden. And I'm going to take that blue wash, and the same thing on these ones where the rocks are going to be facing back away from the person holding the model. I've painted them with that same blue wash. Now on the front of them, I want to paint runes in. Now this is why I changed it, because I was like, I will make actual runes on some rocks and make it look like they did a whole ceremony to summon this thing. So on one rock, I'm just painting a random symbols. Well, actually on both rocks, I'm just painting random symbols. Something that looks like runes to me. I don't know. I didn't want to get too crazy with them because you do need to go back and layer over with dark blue and then light blue in smaller bits and then some white little dots around it to make sure that it looks like it's glowing. And the more intricate the pattern, the harder that becomes. Finally, we're going to take the texture paste, which I use white sand because it's really easy to color whatever color you want it to be. And we're going to put this everywhere that the black isn't on the base. So you want to just make sure it's around the same height as the black that you've done. You definitely don't want it to go over any of the black. And then once the rock runes are dry, go ahead and put them in the base or into the texture paste, and the paste will hold them down. I then used a green wash underneath the or on top of the texture paste, and I'm taking some regular PVA glue, this is Elmer's glue, and adding water to it to get a slurry. Then I'm going to take that glue and paint that on to all of the green areas, being very careful that none of the glue gets anywhere that the black is, because that's where all of the plant matter is going to stick. Now we're going to base it the exact way that I've based all my other miniatures from Zombicide, by putting in some some brown earth and then some moss green battlefield, both from Army Painter. And you just want to make sure that you completely cover the base in this stuff, even in the spots where the runes are, because this will not stick unless there's glue there. So as long as you didn't mess up and get glue everywhere, you'll be fine. Now the last two steps for the entire miniature is some technical paints. I'm using Blood for the Blood Gods. That is my go-to for blood. It's quick and easy. I have already matte sprayed the entire model. You do not want to matte spray over Blood for the Blood Gods, or it won't be glossy and it won't look like blood anymore. So matte spray it first if you're going to matte spray it, and then paint the Blood for the Blood Gods on. Don't worry, it'll stick. It'll be fine. Then I'm using Ard Coat. Make sure that you use a brush that does not have any paint on it. You want it to be very clean, or else it will take on a color instantly and ruin your whole pot. And then I'm painting this over the runes, both the runes that are in the ground and the runes that are on the rock. And this is going to give them a glossy look. Especially looking at it right next to the matte model, I think they're going to look really, really, really good. So what do you think? Do you think he looks good? I think so. I think he came out awesome. Even though I can't say his name, I will still use him in my next game and see how he plays. He's got a really interesting technique that he runs through walls, so I think that's going to be a lot of fun and very challenging. But let me know, what do you like about him? Do you not like him? This was a request from one of my subscribers, so all you got to do is like, subscribe, and leave a comment down below of what model you would like to see painted, and I will paint it for you. But please guys, remember, I have videos coming out every week and your support means so much to me. I will see you all next time.